Aloha from Hawaii. My talk today about bats on Pacific Islands is partly a story about historic perspectives from the past, an examination of the present status and threats to bats in the Pacific region, and a consideration of future conservation challenges. I will set the boundary of our talk today as the islands and land masses within the red lines you see on this map. It includes the 10,000 or so islands that make up Oceania, including the large island of New Guinea, the eastern third of Australia that faces the Pacific Ocean, the islands of New Zealand, and just across into the north of the equator, the islands of Hawaii. There are 190 bat species within these land masses, and they occur on lands that may be hardly above sea level to some very high volcanic peaks on islands like the Solomons and New Guinea and New Zealand. Here you can see the diversity of bat forms across Oceania from photos that I've taken across the years and bats that I've been privileged to work with. Before we proceed further, let's focus just for a moment on why we should be concerned about bats on islands, even if it is a review for most of us. Firstly, bats represent a predominant proportion of all mammalian diversity and endemism in Oceania. Secondly, bats are important agents of seed dispersal, pollination, and insect predation. These are important ecosystem functions for the region. Three, bats hold significance as cultural icons of story, myth, and art throughout Oceania. And fourthly, bats often are bioindicators of environmental health. And this has been reviewed in a recent paper by Danilo Russo in the journal Ecology. What I'll do now is give several perspectives about the past. And to begin with, I'll use two case histories. One case history involves the Cow Wildlife Area, which is located on the north coast of the island of New Guinea and Papua New Guinea. This wildlife area was formed by a grassroots village conservation group. And secondly, then I'll talk about the Hawaiian Bat Research Cooperative, which was a group of people that came together to protect the Hawaiian hoary bat, the only species of bat on Hawaii, in the state of Hawaii, in the archipelago of Hawaii, and it was a group of government, industry, and science people that collaborated together. So the story of Cow Wildlife Area, an area gazetted within the Papua New Guinea government as a protected area, is really the story of one man impacting an entire village. And that one man is Kiatik, who you see on the left here. Kiatik was an enlightened person that wanted to protect a large chunk of forest that was close by the village that he was the chief of. And Kiatik was wise in a number of ways. First, he really promoted education. His children were educated. And secondly, he knew that it would be possible to protect this land better if there was a good economic source of income for the village beyond just the subsistence survival through local gardening that the village still practices to this day. And the thing that Kiatik did was start a moderately large-scale chicken farm in which he marketed both chicken flesh and eggs to the surrounding area, including the township, fairly sizable township of Madang that was nearby. I met Kiatik in 1991 after the idea of protecting this area was already established, but through allowing us to conduct research and to conduct outreach through talking to school groups and the village as a whole, we had a nice collaboration, and I think possibly reinforced the idea that conservation was a good idea for about a decade in working on research there. In the bottom right, you see my former late colleague, John Winkleman, demonstrating how radiotelemetry is done with a directional antenna and a recording device to village children and women. So in the example at Cow, it was initially one person that developed a village idea and following through with it to protect an area that contained native forest and quite a few species of bats. In Hawaii, I'll give an example that's a bit different, which a number of individuals came together with good ideas. And they formed a group called the Hawaii Bat Research Cooperative. This was established in 2003. And leading affiliates of the group were the Division of Land and Natural Resources of the state of Hawaii, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the USGS Biological Resources Division. This group managed to get $300,000 of startup research funding because almost nothing was known about the Hawaiian hoary bat, even though it was listed as an endangered subspecies by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I was actually hired and came on board early in 2004 to lead a research program as an employee of the U.S. Geological Survey based in Hawaii. The goals of the HBRC were to facilitate the recovery of this endangered bat species through research, to also provide guidance, feedback from the research, what was learned, to industry, land managers, and government about the least harmful impacts on the bat and the best ways to proceed with conservation management. And thirdly, to conduct outreach and education. School groups, community groups, NGOs hosted talks all over the island from primarily our research group. Well, this continued up to the present, and in the intervening years since 2003, over $4 million in funding has been procured for outreach, education, and research, and it's been a reasonably successful program, I think, in getting Hawaii to focus on this bat species and its protection. The HBRC partnership organizations provided funding, access to land, permitting, and platforms for educational outreach. You can see that there's a diversity of types of organizations ranging from NGOs to government departments at both the state and federal level. There are schools, zoos, museums, ranching, the wind industry, and watershed consortiums represented, all of which helped with the main goal of the recovery of this endangered species. Many significant research advances have taken place over the past 15 years with funding that started with the HBRC and later its successive platform, the Governor's Endangered Species Research Council. And you can see these topics included foraging movements, including home range, insect prey base, and food habits analysis through DNA analysis of fecal pellets, reproductive timing, seasonal movements including a summer-winter altitudinal migration, population trend inferences from acoustics, molecular genetics and phylogeography, which has shown both the relationship of Lasioris simotus to the North American hoary bat, and has shown that each of the major islands have significantly different genetic populations. And then finally, maternal care and pup behavior and roost ecology are among the topics that were supported. Changing pace, while still looking at the past, there have unfortunately been some notable historical extinctions and extirpations, that is, local extinctions. There are 5 species in Oceania that have gone extinct within the last 2 centuries, within historical times. 3 of these are flying foxes, relatively large bats, greater than 165 grams, Brunius, Tacudae, Pilosis, all on small islands. Percy Island off Australia's tiny, Guam, and in the Palau Islands, Pteropus pilosus went extinct. All 3 of these were probably due heavily to hunting pressure impacts for local consumptions. But there are also a couple of small bats, Mysticina robusta and Nyctophilus hauensis on New Zealand and Lord Howe Island, respectively. Probably the major impact on their extinctions were the invasive rat species that were brought in by Europeans. And then a couple of local extirpations we can look at. Chilenolopus gouldi on Norfolk Island, which again, very small and isolated island, disappeared in the 20th century. The cause for that, not well known. And Emballonura semicaudata, which has gone locally extinct on quite a few islands within its distribution. So on several islands in the Marianas, on Guam, and American Samoa, and other islands of Samoa, and on Vitu Levu island from Fiji, all in the 20th century. And this is just tiny 6-gram bat. Its reason for demise probably largely due to cave disturbances. Chilenolopus gouldi, I was part of a team just a few years ago that made acoustic searches with microphones over the island in conjunction with National Parks Australia, and we failed to find them. So this species has not been seen for over 50 years and is probably extinct on Norfolk Island, though it exists still in Australia. The previous slide that we just talked about fairly recent extinctions within the last 2 centuries. But extinctions have occurred and have been documented through prehistoric times. And one example is the island of Eua in Tonga. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Eua Island is a small island of only 87 kilometers square, and its maximum elevation 330 meters above sea level. David Stedman is a zooarchaeologist that has spent a great deal of time excavating islands across Oceania, primarily interested in birds, but he's also collected bat bones, and together with the late Carl Koopman presented an analysis of Eua Island's bat fauna, in which they obtained bones from 5 different species of bats. And unfortunately, 3 of those species were extirpated long ago on Eua Island and are no longer present. So the oldest layer that they excavated was 3,000 years ago, before the colonization of Tonga, and then go up into the modern era. And Chaerophon bregulae, small mollacid that still occurs elsewhere today. Emballonurus semicaudata, once again. Notopterus macdonaldi, a pteropodid that's a nectarivore cave dweller. Pteropus samoensis and Pteropus tonganus were all present 3,000 years ago, but of these 5, only Emballonurus semicaudata and Pteropus tonganus remain alive today, the other 3 being extirpated. And a conclusion of Koopman and Stedman was that these 3 bat species, along with 2 lizard and 23 bird species, probably were driven to local extinction as a result of human impacts since the colonization of the island. So extinctions have occurred fairly deep in time, and more recently by all of the waves of humans that have come across time to be present and occupy the islands of Oceania. Let's turn now to the present and the future, the projected future. What are the major threats to bats on Pacific Islands? Well, there are a number of things that are sort of one-off potential catastrophic events that in themselves can cause a local extinction or a species-wide extinction in some cases. And these include volcanic eruptions. The Oceania is on the ring of fire with many active volcanoes and many others that are dormant but alive. Cyclonic storms, we know with climate change that in recent years, more frequent and more powerful storms have been affecting Oceania. Fires, as climate change occurs, many places are experiencing drought at times, and fires that become widespread. The bushfires of Australia being very famous, and also Hawaii has increasing threats of bushfires, particularly on the islands of Maui and Hawaii. Tsunamis are a threat, particularly for low-lying areas and coastal areas of larger islands. Drought associated with climate change and temperature rise, both can impact bats. We know that during times of drought and high temperatures that flying foxes in Australia simply have heat strokes and drop out of trees. And then salt incursion. Salt incursion can be the result of a single catastrophic event like a cyclonic storm or tsunamis impacting a small low-lying island, or they can take place over long periods of time as incremental sea level rise occurs. Sadly, there are additional threats to bats in the Pacific Island region. And on this slide, we'll discuss those threats that build up continuously over time. We can start with invasive species. Examples are the brown tree snake, which invaded Guam from New Guinea decades ago and has caused the extinction of many bird species in Guam, as well as a massive decline of the Marianas flying fox. Coqui frogs in Hawaii are another example. This invasive frog from Puerto Rico came in with ornamental plants about 15 years ago, and the frog competes for many of the insects that the bat eats. Riley Bernard, in her master's thesis, shown that there's about 30% overlap in the diet of the frog and the bat. Other threats of the region include climate change, increases in wind turbines, which are killer engines for bats, although they are clean energy, they are not green energy. Human population growth itself, with all kinds of feedback stresses for increased land development and resource use and pollution, is a threat. Emerging diseases, including diseases directly that affect wildlife like bats, but emerging diseases from wildlife that have established in humans, such as COVID, have established a backlash of humans impacting bats by seeking them out and destroying their colonies in some cases. Sea level rise is a horrible regional threat that it's already caused migration of humans from their island homes to other places as refugees. Bushmeat hunting, although maybe not as severe as it was several decades ago, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back in the late 80s and 90s put enforcement officers in place to better regulate the importation of bush meat of bats from Pacific Islands, particularly into Guam. Roost disturbance, the disturbance of caves, and the large camps of flying foxes in trees are a problem. Logging throughout many islands in the region has reduced forest cover, led to erosion and other problems, including loss of habitat and fragmentation of habitat for bats, and then finally mining. In order to protect the species in the Pacific Island region, we've got to know something about them. And let's take a look now at a summary of most recent IUCN Red List conservation status by family and category of conservation threat. So the good news is that 106 species, slightly over 50% of all those in the region, are of least concern. On this slide, you'll note that the blue bars represent the family Pteropotidae, the orange bars the family Vespertilionidae, and the gray bars the remaining 6 families of bats. So in that least concern category, note that there are approximately equal numbers of species in the 2 family groups plus the lumped multiple family group. There's also in the near threatened category species which are maybe close to the tipping point of getting a threatened category. Fortunately, there's only 9 species in that grouping. The bad news is we have 46 species, almost 25% of the total regional species diversity, that are vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered, and the bulk of those species are in the family Pteropotidae, the flying foxes. And last kernel of knowledge to squeeze out of this slide is to look at the data deficient category. I have lumped IUCN data deficient species with not assessed species into this one category, which here says data deficient. There's 29 species in this group. Many of these species used to belong to another species lumped together and have been split off primarily through the recent DNA analysis showing that there were cryptic species lumped together. Some of these species probably have enough understanding that we could go in and assess them. Others just haven't been studied and need to be studied, even though they may be in very remote areas. I'd now like to make a point that I think is sometimes overlooked with some data about bat diversity from the island of New Guinea. And if you only focus on the red bars on this graph, you'll note that the number of species is very rich in the lowlands. For example, on New Guinea, slightly over 60 species of bats occur from the sea level up to 500 meters. But that this diversity declines very rapidly, and at 3,500 meters, there's only 1 species of bat left. Marsupials and rodents do occur over 3,500 meters, but not bats. Notable that coastal lowland areas tend to have the highest concentrations of human population and the development caused by humans, including urban, agricultural, logging, roads, harbors, airports. And all of this has the following consequences. There's thus, with the development of the lowlands on high relief islands, a disproportionate loss of the rich biodiversity, which is exclusively in the lowlands. And that includes loss of biodiversity of bats. Most species of Pteropus flying foxes and most sheath-tail or imballinurid bats are coastal lowland specialists that particularly may suffer loss of biodiversity from habitat loss in the lowlands. Another consequence is that the lowland areas tend to have higher land values than montane elevations, and thus the national parks and reserves are often placed on in the montane zones rather than in the lowlands. Two examples. In Hawaii, the two largest mitigation areas which were specifically created for conservation of hoary bats are above 1,500 meters. Yet the bat does not breed and successfully raise young at elevations above 1,000 meters. Second example, in Papua New Guinea, all of the national parks are located above 800 meters, none of them in the lowlands. Reviewing our concerns and conservation priorities, I would list the following. Number one, we must reduce the reliance on parachute biologists, those biologists from foreign regions that come in to an island group, do some quick research, leave, and maybe never come back or have very little influence. We need to support education, training, and empowerment for Pacific Islander conservation biologists. There's nothing better than conservation for your home area in terms of the strength of how effective that conservation is going to be. Secondly, let's continue to enforce and provide protection improvements for pteropodid bats, particularly the large ones, which are subject to hunting by bushmeat, for whether it be local markets or markets in other islands. Thirdly, there needs to be a vastly improved protection for lowland reserves, those areas where bat diversity is highest. Fourth, let's put an emphasis on protecting where bats are abundant at large, vulnerable roosts that include caves and large flying fox camps. Fifthly, provide attention to conducting research and evaluating those data deficient and not assessed species within the IUCN Red List. And sixth and last, although you may have other ideas which are probably very valid, important concerns, let's improve outreach and education for students, for citizen groups, and for government officials about the benefits derived from bats and how important they are to our ecosystems. In his great work, Systema Naturae, Linnaeus in 1758 recognized a grand total of 7 species of bats. The blue line shows the progress in the number of recognized living species of bats through time to today, where we recognize 1,460 species. There's probably been a couple more named since I got that figure from Nancy Simmons. But let's consider, at some point in the future, probably not too many years from now, we're going to know all of the species of bats that live. And from that point on, we can either have a static model projected where we don't lose any species to extinction. That's probably an unlikely model. But I'll leave it with you. Which of the following 2 models would you prefer? The solid line A, in which there's a very slow decrease in species as population increase and development of the world increases, or would you prefer to have model B, in which there's a sharp, drastic decline that's very rapid in the loss of bat species? The future, model A, model B, it's up to us. How much effort we put into bat conservation now is going to determine which of those models we see in our lifetime going forward. I'll leave you with these beautiful illustration of the diverse bat fauna of Papua New Guinea as illustrated by Fiona Reed in my book, The Bats of Papua New Guinea. The future to protect all of these bats throughout the Pacific is up to all of us. I wish you many happy successes for the future. Let's all pull together. Thank you.